In the 1860s, Hawk with the Yellowtail feathers was born as one of the last generations born in freedom, as they say, in the Buffalo days. Soon later, in 1868, they were assigned names and last names like white people, and they were forced to move into the confinements of reservations. Today, the descendants of Hawk with the yellowtail feathers are known as the Yellowtail family. I was able to sit with Wells Yellowtail and have him tell me his cattle rancher story. I drove all the way from California to Montana with Bowser to learn about the indigenous culture. This wasn't a trip planned. This was a consequence of this guy trying to ditch me. What he didn't know is that it's not that easy to get rid of me. And he was about to give me the biggest gift of the year.
He was, I don't know, probably born in a 1800s, I imagine still lived in a teepees, hunting buffalo, days, and then when they put him on the crows on the reservation, he was probably one of the first generation, reservation Indians, and then his kids, my grandfather and them, they actually grew up down the river here. And then when the government allotted land, meaning, they give individual tribal members 1,000 acres, they got a lot of their land in this area. So my grandfather, his son, moved up in this valley, and homesteaded, and slowly built up their cattle ranch,
Yeah, looks like a good range.
This information Wells shared with me was pretty confusing and contradicting from everything I knew about Native Americans. We were used to see them as cowboys or Native Americans.
And there's one further down that way.
I was never expecting that they shared so much in common between them. Seems like since the moment his great-grandfather was part of this land, being a cowboy and handling cattle was part of their new legacy. Nowadays, whether the white cowboys that live on the border of the reservation or the indigenous cowboys, they all work together and help each other to manage their cattle.
So our reservation is checkerboarded, which means there's native, tribal-owned land and non-native land. So there are a lot of non-native ranching families that live nearby. Mm-hmm. And, part of the ranching lifestyle is that we have to rely on one another. And that's also an indigenous way of being, is that we know how to rely on one another. And so my brother, when they're branding, he goes and helps them. Mm-hmm. And when we're branding here, they come and help him. So that's always just how, ranching families have always operated. So growing up, my grandpa's ranch, my dad's ranch, my brothers, we always work with our neighbors and our family. So it's very family and community oriented. And our neighbors are non-native, and they live right down the road from us. Mm-hmm. And some of them we went to school with. They've been, some of them like Ben Monk, we've known him since we were little kids. And so they're family, longtime family friends.
We're probably 50 miles from the agency where a lot of the activity, back in them days, a lot of the tribal members still, relied on rations and stuff, but I think it was, so far they had to find their own way of surviving, and a lot of them, just by watching the non-Indians, raising gardens, they started a garden, and then lived on a lot of wild game, and then slowly got into the ranching, there was a neighbor, a white rancher, who controlled a lot of the land. I think my dad said it was in the 30s, but they had a big blizzard out, they'd calve out in the hills here, in the springtime, and a big blizzard hit and drove all the cattle into the river bottom, like down here, they were looking for shelter, and they were calving, and they were dropping calves. A lot of them died. Those that survived were hungry and headed out to higher ground to feed. And abandoned a lot of calves. That were just starving to death. So this neighbor says, if you got a milk cow, you can save them, help yourself. So I think they said he got 5 or 6 heifer calves, and they raised them on a milk cow, and that was the start of their herd. They kept growing, and slowly, built up a herd to where they could utilize their own land, their own allotments. It was leased out, to these big ranches, but as their herd grew, they were able to fence their own property off, and run their own livestock, So through the years, and then we've just added to it, and today, between Stephen and I, we probably close to 15,000 acres. If it wasn't for the tribal land, we would probably be able to compete, with a lot of the wealthy ranchers in the valley,
All right, we're ready for the grand entry. Now you. I know. I'm listening now you. I'm back. Gallery Mamu. Now you. Daylight Grove Beaver, U.S. Navy.
The contemporary powwows, it's actually like a dance competition. But they're really just like community celebrations where communities gather together and dance and celebrate. So 4th of July, Crow Fair is our biggest powwow of the year, and all of our families, we do participate in those things. We all camp together. It's like basically we're all the districts, our whole reservation, we come to our central agency and we camp for a week with our families. And a lot of times, like at our celebration, when we're at Crow Fair, we do namings for our children. We'll have like kind of an opportunity to celebrate birthdays, or one of the big things is naming ceremonies. So Crow people and a lot of Native people believe that in our language it's important to have our Native names, Apsalaga names or Northern Cheyenne names. And so Crow Fair is an opportunity where we do that when we have big family gatherings, and we'll ask an elder or a clan relative to pray on a name for the person who we wish to give one to. And one of my brothers, Stephen, was named Sacred Black Horse, and my other brother was named Standing Bear, and they were given to them by our uncle Leonard Benz, who you guys got to meet. So, and they explained to them, and our people believe that that's how our Creator, God, knows you, is by your Apsalaga name. Those types of celebrations are opportunities for our family to get together and just celebrate one another, celebrate families. Or we use like American holiday weekends as an opportunity to like have powwows and parades. So we celebrate it in a much different way. Our language and our customs were one of the first things that was tried to strip from us. So my grandfather was the first generation to go to boarding school, and there they were forced not to use, they were actually punished if they were used their language or like dressed Indian. And so now my father's generation and now my generation is where we're really kind of reclaiming that, because it was really forbidden for so long. We're in a time now where we're reclaiming that and we're not afraid. So myself, I'm one of the first in my family to be like, I want to dance, so I'm going to start dancing. I want to participate in our ceremonies. And now to see my brothers participating and my other relatives, like it kind of breaks that like kind of barrier that was forced on us. And so you'll see that in a lot of families. It ranges from family to family. Like some are fluent language speakers, some are ceremonial people, some are ranching families. But to see that our culture is still really vibrant and alive here, and it's only going to grow and get better as the generations come. And there's a lot of advocacy happening now with some of the women actually that you filmed and photographed. Those are some of my best friends and women who I admire, because they're doing prolific things in our community for the betterment of our people. And so that's why I specifically selected them. Like Jory LaFrance, she's about to get her PhD as a scientist, and all of her work is dedicated to our waterways and preserving the life and longevity of our water so that our people can thrive. And like Eleanor Kindness and Amber Cummins, Amber Burden Ground, Myrna Medicine Horse, Amy Yellowtail, they're all women who are advocates for our people and our community and our children, and I really admire them.